The first encounter. The desert sun beat down on the barren, windswept planet. Its heat scorched the ground and sent ripples of shimmering air through the horizon. Jack, the lone survivor of a brutal alien ambush, dragged his battered body through the dust. His team was gone. He could still hear the screams in his mind, feel the heat of the explosions, the sharp sting of the energy weapons, and the sudden silence that followed. The aliens, Zoraxians, were unlike anything the human forces had ever encountered. Their bodies were a blend of organic and mechanical, armored creatures that could tear apart a battalion with nothing more than a flick of their claws. Jack had witnessed their power firsthand. He had seen the alien war machines shoot down his comrades, their weapons disintegrating human flesh in an instant. He was the last one left, though Jack barely felt human anymore. His leg was wounded, and his head throbbed with pain, but he kept moving. Every step felt like a mile. He staggered forward toward an abandoned Zoraxian base, its jagged towers looming in the distance like dark sentinels watching over a forsaken world. Jack had no choice but to make his way there. The base was a place of importance. He had gathered enough intelligence on it during his mission to know that it was a hub for the Zoraxian forces. As Jack approached the entrance, his senses screamed at him that something was wrong. The air was thick with tension. The Zoraxians should have been celebrating their victory, yet there was no sign of activity. The base appeared abandoned, but Jack knew better than to trust appearances. He crept inside, his every movement slow and calculated. His heart raced, pumping adrenaline through his veins. He couldn't let his guard down. What he found inside was worse than anything he could have imagined. The Zoraxian commanders, a group of towering reptilian aliens, were gathered in a large chamber. The room buzzed with low conversation in a language Jack couldn't understand. The aliens were preoccupied, and Jack realized they didn't know he was there. His presence had gone unnoticed. But something about them didn't sit right. Their posture was rigid, their movements sharp and almost cautious. Something had changed. Then, as if to answer his silent question, one of the commanders turned toward a large holographic screen that flickered to life in the center of the room. It displayed a live feed of a human, Jack himself, fleeing from the battlefield, barely alive. The hologram zoomed in on his face, and the room fell into stunned silence. Jack didn't know how they had found him, but he could feel their eyes on him. It was as if they knew, on some primal level, that he was different from the others. His heart pounded in his chest, a warning echo in his brain. He wasn't just any human. He was something new, something they hadn't accounted for. Then, without warning, one of the commanders turned to face the rest, his voice grating and unnatural in the human tongue. "He should be dead by now," he growled. "No human survives a direct hit from our plasma cannons." Jack's blood ran cold. They had been using plasma cannons to wipe out his team. He had seen it, felt it, and yet here he was, alive. The truth hit him like a ton of bricks. These aliens had never expected anyone to survive their weapons. But he wasn't out of danger yet. Before he could act, the sound of a heavy door sliding open echoed across the chamber. Another commander entered, his figure towering above the others, his presence commanding. He had the markings of a high-ranking officer. This was the leader, the one they called Lyra. His cold, unblinking eyes swept across the room, and as they locked onto Jack's image on the screen, a thin smile crept onto his lips. "Prepare the interrogation chamber," Kizar ordered. Jack's pulse quickened. The Zoraxians had likely never seen human resilience like this. He didn't know how long he had before they decided to experiment on him, but he couldn't afford to wait. He needed to act fast. Despite his injuries, Jack's instincts kicked in. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting to send a message. As he quietly retreated into the shadows of the base, his mind raced. Why was he immune to their weapons? What had happened to his body during the battle? And why did they seem so afraid? The questions burned in his mind, but there was no time for answers now. He couldn't let them capture him. Not when they were so close to understanding the truth. The Zoraxians would stop at nothing to dissect him and unlock whatever strange immunity his body had developed. As Jack moved deeper into the base, he stumbled into a darkened corridor. The walls were lined with strange alien symbols, and the air smelled of stale metal and chemicals. He couldn't remember how much time had passed, but the weight of his fatigue felt like 1,000 pounds. His leg gave out beneath him, and he collapsed onto the cold floor, gasping for air. Just as he thought his body couldn't take any more, something miraculous happened. A tingling sensation coursed through his veins. He felt a surge of energy, like a spark of life igniting within him. His body began to heal at an alarming rate. The blood on his leg began to clot faster than he could see, and the pain in his head faded away. Jack's eyes widened. The aliens weren't the only ones who were shocked. He was too. He didn't know how or why it was happening, but it was undeniable. Something in him had changed. He wasn't just resisting their weapons. He was healing, adapting, evolving. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. The question was, what were the Zoraxians going to do when they realized this? As Jack pushed himself back to his feet, he knew one thing for certain. His immunity wasn't just a defense, it was the key to humanity's survival. If the Zoraxians didn't kill him, they would soon come to understand that humanity was more resilient than they could ever have imagined. And that realization would change the galaxy forever. The discovery, the darkness of the alien base enveloped Jack like a suffocating blanket. He stumbled through narrow corridors, the faint hum of alien machinery echoing in his ears. Every step was a reminder of the torture he had endured and the strange, overwhelming power now coursing through his body. He could feel his energy returning, his strength regenerating, as though his cells were adapting to the alien environment. He was healing faster than any human should have been able to. But he had no time to dwell on it. His heart raced as he navigated through the maze of twisting passageways. He needed to find a way out. The Zoraxians were after him, no doubt about it. He could hear their voices faintly in the distance, growing louder as they scoured the base for any sign of his escape. He needed to move quickly. Every moment felt like it could be his last. Yet as Jack moved deeper into the base, the urgency of his escape took a backseat to an overwhelming sense of curiosity. Something was happening to him, something beyond the physical. The Zoraxian weapons had failed to kill him, and his body was now adapting to an unimaginable degree. How could this be? His mind raced with questions, but he had no answers. Only time would tell. He rounded a corner and stumbled upon an unexpected sight. A room filled with Zoraxian scientists, their pale, multi-eyed faces focused on strange, glowing screens. They were working frantically, analyzing data that seemed to pulse with urgency. Jack tried to stay hidden in the shadows, but his presence had already been detected. One of the scientists, a slender creature with jagged skin, turned its head, its many eyes locking onto his. Before Jack could react, the creature screeched and alerted the others. The scientist sprang into action, but Jack was already moving. He bolted toward the far end of the room, ducking behind a large metal structure. The scientist hesitated, confused by his sudden burst of speed. Jack's breath came in short gasps. His body felt stronger than before, but his injuries still weighed him down. The sharp pain in his leg and head hadn't fully subsided, but he could feel the healing process accelerating. He felt different. A few moments passed in silence, but then one of the scientists, a tall Zoraxian with deep red markings, approached a console and activated a series of holographic screens. The screens flickered to life, displaying detailed scans of human anatomy. Jack's body was displayed in full 3D form, and what the Zoraxians saw left them speechless. This is impossible," the scientist muttered, its voice thick with disbelief. "His immune system, it's adapting. It's evolving." Jack didn't need to understand their alien language to recognize the terror in their tone. Whatever was happening to him, it was beyond their comprehension. He had become something more than human, something that defied all logic and science. The lead scientist, now visibly shaken, turned to address the others. "Report to the council. This is no ordinary human. We must inform the leaders. They need to know." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The council. The Galactic Council. He knew they were the highest authority in the galaxy, a council composed of the most powerful and dangerous species in the known universe. If they discovered what was happening to him, it would only be a matter of time before they decided humanity was a threat that needed to be eradicated. He couldn't let that happen. Just as the scientists began to mobilize, Jack knew he had to make a decision. He could attempt to escape again, but the Zoraxians were closing in. The discovery of his immunity could be the key to understanding the Zoraxian weapons, and once the council got involved, there would be no place in the galaxy safe enough for him to hide. Suddenly, a new voice rang out from the doorway. A figure stepped into the room, cloaked in a dark, heavy robe. The Zoraxians fell silent as the figure approached the console. "Is it true?" The voice was cold, calculating, and Jack immediately recognized it. It was Lyra, the leader of the Zoraxian forces. His reputation for ruthlessness was legendary. Jack knew that the leader would not hesitate to eliminate any threats, especially one like him. Zar's sharp eyes scanned the room, then fixed on Jack. His lips curled into a predatory smile. "The humans have proven resilient. Too resilient for my liking. The Galactic Council needs to know about this. They will not let such a threat exist." The Zoraxians in the room stiffened, acknowledging the gravity of Zar's words. Jack knew that time was running out. He needed to escape, but the base was now swarming with guards. The room was filled with alien technology, alien weapons, and alien minds, all focused on one thing: understanding Jack. And Jack knew, in that moment, that he was no longer just a soldier. He was something far more dangerous, a living weapon. The scientists began to prepare a new round of scans, likely aiming to study him in greater detail. Jack could feel the weight of their attention, the chill of their scientific curiosity. They were going to figure him out, and then they would use him. There was no way he was going to allow that. With the Zoraxians distracted by their own analysis, Jack's mind began to race. He needed to make his move now, before Zar and the others could devise a plan to capture him. As the room buzzed with activity, Jack turned and made a break for the door. His heart pounded as the cool, metallic floor echoed beneath his feet. His escape had just begun, but he knew one thing for sure. The Zoraxians were no longer the only ones hunting. They had just awoken a force they could never control, and the human spirit had a way of fighting back when the odds were stacked against it. As Jack vanished into the labyrinth of the Zoraxian base, he couldn't help but wonder how long it would take for the Council to realize the truth. The humans had just become the galaxy's greatest threat, or its greatest hope, and Jack was about to find out which path he would choose. The escape plan. Jack's heart raced as he dashed through the dark, metallic corridors of the Zoraxian base. His pulse quickened with each step, the sounds of alien voices growing faint behind him. The discovery of his immunity had ignited a firestorm among the Zoraxian scientists, and their pursuit of him had only just begun. He could hear their footsteps echoing in the distance, and the unmistakable sound of their weapons charging. He couldn't afford to waste time. His mind raced, replaying the moment when he had first realized that something was different, when his body had healed itself in ways he couldn't explain. The Zoraxian weapons had been designed to obliterate life on a molecular level, but they had failed. His body had adapted, and somehow his immune system had found a way to protect him. But why? Why was he immune when every other soldier had perished? Was this something unique to him, or was there something in humanity's genetic code that made them more resistant than the Zoraxians had ever imagined? He didn't have the answers. All he knew was that the Zoraxians couldn't capture him, not now. Not when he was starting to piece together the implications of his newfound strength. They wouldn't stop until they found a way to dissect him, to figure out what made him so different. And that meant the entire galaxy would soon know that humanity was no longer the weak, fragile species it had once been. They had become something else, something stronger, more dangerous. As Jack navigated the maze of the base, he noticed a door to his right. It was a small, unassuming access point that led into a dimly lit hallway. Without hesitation, he slipped inside. The room beyond was filled with Zoraxian equipment, scanners, and machines designed to monitor and analyze alien specimens. The air smelled of oil and chemicals, and the walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that Jack couldn't understand. It was here that he saw her. Lyra. She was a Zoraxian scientist, but there was something different about her. While the others had been cold, calculating, and ruthless, Lyra seemed hesitant. There was an air of quiet rebellion about her, a subtle defiance that Jack couldn't ignore. She was alone, standing in front of a console, her back turned to him. Her long, silvery hair cascaded down her back, and her delicate fingers hovered over the holographic controls. Jack hesitated for a moment. Could he trust her? Could he risk revealing himself to someone who could easily turn him into the council? But something told him she wasn't like the others. There was no malice in her posture, no eagerness in her movements. Instead, there was an almost imperceptible sense of empathy in the way she worked. He took a deep breath, his muscles tense with anticipation. He had no choice but to take a chance. "Lyra," he said, his voice barely a whisper. She stiffened, her eyes darting toward him in shock. For a moment, they just stood there, both of them unsure of what to do next. Then, in a swift motion, she stepped toward him, her eyes scanning the room nervously. "How did you?" she began, her voice low, almost fearful. "I'm not here to hurt you," Jack replied quickly, lowering his weapon in a gesture of trust. "I need your help. The Zoraxians are going to kill me, and they'll dissect me if they get their hands on me. You're the only one who can help me escape." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. But something shifted in her gaze. Recognition, perhaps. She saw something in Jack that the others did not. There was no anger, no judgment in her expression, only a quiet understanding. "Why should I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "You're human. You're the enemy. You've been nothing but a target to us since we first encountered your species. Why would I risk everything for you?" Jack felt the weight of her words, and for a brief moment, he wondered if he could convince her. After all, she was one of them. One of the very beings who had tried to wipe out his people. She had been a part of the force that had killed so many of his comrades. But in her eyes, he saw something that the others lacked, a glimmer of doubt. She wasn't convinced by the Zoraxian propaganda. She was different. "Because," Jack began, choosing his words carefully, "because you know what it's like to question everything. I can see it in your eyes. You're not like them. You're not a monster." Lyra's expression softened, though her gaze remained wary. She glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear. The sound of distant footsteps grew louder. "You have to leave," she said urgently. "Now. I can't help you if they catch us, but I know a way out. Follow me, and we'll get you to the transport dock. It's your only chance." Without waiting for a response, Lyra turned and moved quickly toward the far end of the room. Jack followed closely behind, his footsteps barely making a sound on the cold floor. The air was thick with tension as they moved through the narrow halls, each corner a potential death trap. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every moment, they grew closer to the Zoraxians, and Jack knew that if they were caught now, it would be the end. They reached a narrow maintenance tunnel, just big enough for them to crawl through. Lyra motioned for him to follow her, and Jack hesitated for only a moment before climbing in after her. They crawled through the cramped, dark passageway, the sound of their breathing the only noise in the silence. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached a hatch at the end of the tunnel. Lyra paused, her hand on the control panel, before turning to face Jack one last time. "I'm doing this because I believe in something," she said softly. "Something bigger than the Zoraxian Empire. Something that could change everything." The hatch hissed open, revealing the cold night air outside. Lyra stepped into the open, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. Jack followed, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of escape. But as they made their way toward the transport dock, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger yet. The Zoraxians were still hunting him, and now, with Lyra's help, they had just become a target. But there was no turning back. Jack had made a choice, and the course of his life, and perhaps the fate of humanity, had just shifted. As they approached the transport dock, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Jack glanced over his shoulder, his heart racing. The Zoraxians were closing in. This wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Jack allowed himself to hope. The Galactic Council's response. The transport dock was a small, isolated area of the Zoraxian base, hidden away from the main military complex. Lyra and Jack had reached it in a hurried silence, but as they approached the sleek alien shuttle that would take them to safety, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. Jack's mind raced, but his body was exhausted. The adrenaline that had fueled him was beginning to wear off, leaving him with a deep, gnawing weariness. Lyra quickly punched in a sequence of commands into a nearby control panel. The door to the shuttle opened with a hiss, and she motioned for Jack to climb inside. As they both stepped into the craft, Jack noticed her hands trembling ever so slightly. She was just as nervous as he was, perhaps more so. They weren't just fleeing for their lives. They were running from a decision that could very well change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "We're not safe yet," Lyra whispered as the shuttle powered up. "The Zoraxian Council will not rest until they find you. They'll stop at nothing to capture you and dissect you. You've become a symbol now, of something they can't control." Jack nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had known the risks, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel all the more real. The Council was the most powerful governing body in the galaxy. They were ruthless, calculating, and decisive. If they wanted him, if they saw him as a threat, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate him. The shuttle hummed to life, lifting off from the dock with a smooth, controlled motion. As they ascended into the Zoraxian atmosphere, Jack could see the sprawling alien city below them, a dark labyrinth of towering structures and neon lights. It was a city of secrets, of control, and Jack realized that he was no longer a mere soldier. He was a beacon of resistance. They had just crossed a line. There would be no going back. As the shuttle broke through the planet's upper atmosphere, Jack turned his gaze toward Lyra. "How do you know you can trust me?" he asked, his voice quiet but sincere. He had seen the fire in her eyes earlier, but now he needed to know the truth. Lyra's eyes softened as she glanced back at him. "I've seen what the Zoraxians are capable of. I've watched as they wiped out entire civilizations, just for control. I've spent years working under them, collecting data, performing experiments on species, including humans. But when I saw you survive their weapons, when I saw the Council's reaction, I knew I couldn't be part of this anymore." Jack stared at her, her words sinking deep into his soul. "But you could have turned me in. You could have taken me back to the Council." She shook her head slowly, her silvery hair catching the light. "I couldn't. Not after what I've seen. You're not like the others. The Zoraxians, they believe in domination. They see strength as power over others. But you, what you've become, is something they can't control. I believe there's something more to you, more to humanity. You're not just surviving. You're evolving. You've become the answer to a question they've been asking for centuries." Jack looked at her in silence, the gravity of her words pulling him deeper into the situation. What had been an accidental survival was now something much bigger. The Zoraxian Empire was built on fear and control, and the Council's influence stretched across the galaxy. But in him, they had just discovered an unknown force, something that could change everything. The shuttle's autopilot guided them through space, the stars streaking by in a blur. But Jack's mind was no longer focused on their escape. Instead, he found himself wondering how long it would be before the Zoraxian Council would respond to this new threat. They would have already learned of his survival by now. He could feel the Council's cold, calculating eyes watching him from the shadows. Back at the heart of the Zoraxian Empire, the Galactic Council was convening in a high-tech, cylindrical chamber. A glowing holographic table in the center displayed a rotating 3D model of the galaxy, with markers pinpointing key star systems, including the one where Jack had been captured. It was a place of power, of decisions that shaped the future of countless worlds. Zar, the leader of the Zoraxian forces, stood at the head of the council, his sharp, reptilian eyes scanning the gathered delegates. His posture was rigid, his arms crossed, and his voice was low, filled with authority. "I'd just received the report." Zar began, his gaze fixed on the holographic map. "The human has escaped. He survived our most deadly weapon and has been aided by one of our own." He turned to the council members, his voice growing colder. "Lyra, the scientist who helped him, is now a traitor. We cannot allow this to continue. If humans have developed this kind of resistance, it threatens everything we've built." A murmur spread through the council as the delegates exchanged uneasy glances. The council members, representing the most powerful species in the galaxy, understood the implications of Zar's words. If humanity had unlocked a defense against their weapons, if their immune systems were evolving beyond what the Zoraxians had anticipated, then the entire balance of power in the galaxy was in jeopardy. "The human is not merely a survivor," Zar continued, his voice rising with anger. "He is a symbol, a challenge to everything we've fought for. If we don't stop this now, it will be too late. The Zoraxian Empire will fall." One of the council members, a hulking alien with 6 arms and a jagged jaw, growled in agreement. "The humans are not just a threat. They are a revolution waiting to happen. We cannot allow this immune human to inspire others." Another delegate, a sleek, silver-skinned creature from a distant system, spoke up. "We need to capture this human and study him. Understand how his immune system works. If we can replicate it, we'll have a weapon far more powerful than any plasma cannon. We'll have an army of invincible soldiers." Zar nodded sharply, his cold eyes narrowing. "Exactly. And the sooner we act, the better. We must find this human, and we must eliminate him before he spreads hope to other species." The room fell silent, each council member contemplating the weight of Zar's words. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The Zoraxians had always been in control, but now they faced a new challenge. A challenge they could not ignore. Back in the shuttle, Jack was unaware of the Council's urgent deliberations. He and Lyra were speeding through space, but the dark hand of the Zoraxians was already reaching for them. The Galactic Council would stop at nothing to capture him, and Lyra, before their plan could take shape. As Jack stared out into the endless void of space, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Zoraxians had just awoken something far more dangerous than they could comprehend, and Jack wasn't sure whether he would be able to escape the consequences of their discovery. Human rebellion. The stars outside the shuttle window streaked past, distant points of light, in the vast, dark ocean of space. For a moment, Jack allowed himself to relax. He had made it out of the Zoraxian base, and Lyra, the unexpected ally, was by his side. But as the minutes stretched into hours, an undeniable feeling of dread settled into Jack's chest. They weren't truly free yet. The Zoraxians, and especially the Galactic Council, were relentless. Jack had just witnessed their power firsthand, and he knew that they would stop at nothing to capture him, or worse, destroy him. Lyra was working tirelessly at the shuttle's control panel, adjusting their course to an isolated sector of the galaxy far from Zoraxian reach. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, but Jack could tell she was just as uneasy as he was. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Both of them knew what was coming. After what felt like an eternity of silence, Lyra finally spoke. "They'll be hunting us," she said softly, her voice filled with a quiet conviction. "The Zoraxians won't stop until they find you, until they understand what you are, what humanity is capable of. You're not just a threat to them, Jack. You're a symbol, a rallying cry for others who might follow in your footsteps." Jack turned his gaze toward her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time, Jack saw a spark of something fierce and determined. "There are others who have been oppressed by the Zoraxians. The galaxy is full of species who live in fear of their rule. And now, because of you, they've seen that it's possible to fight back. You've shown them that there's hope." Jack's heart raced as her words sunk in. He had only survived because of a strange, inexplicable adaptation in his body. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't chosen to be the one to stand up to the Zoraxians. But now that he was here, alive and able to resist, he realized that the fight was no longer just about him. It was about something bigger. The Zoraxians had ruled the galaxy with an iron fist for centuries. They had crushed resistance movements, annihilated entire civilizations, and used fear and brutality to maintain their dominance. But now, with Jack's strange immunity, something had shifted. A crack had appeared in the Zoraxian armor. It was no longer just about surviving. They had awakened something in humanity that could spark a rebellion. Lyra continued, her voice gaining strength. "There are outposts, resistance cells in hidden parts of the galaxy. They'd been fighting the Zoraxian Empire for years, but they've never had the kind of hope that you represent. Now we can show them that the impossible is possible. That humans, no, all species, can fight back." Jack's mind raced. He had only wanted to survive, to escape, but now he understood the weight of what Lyra was saying. If humanity could resist the Zoraxians, then perhaps others could too. They weren't alone in this fight. The entire galaxy was waiting for a spark, something to light the fire of rebellion. "Where do we start?" Jack asked, determination in his voice. The fear and uncertainty that had plagued him earlier began to shift, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. He wasn't just running anymore. He was leading. Lyra smiled, the first genuine smile Jack had seen from her since they met. "We start with the rebels. We go to them, gather support, and show them the truth. You're not just a man, Jack, you're a beacon. And together, we can build a coalition strong enough to take on the Zoraxian Empire." Jack nodded, a fierce fire igniting within him. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't be fighting alone. The shuttle cut through space like a bullet, heading toward a remote, uncharted system. It was here that Lyra believed they would find the first of the resistance cells, small but organized groups of rebels who had been resisting the Zoraxian forces in the shadows. Jack had no idea what to expect, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his arrival would mark the beginning of something monumental. A few hours later, the shuttle entered the atmosphere of a small, barren planet. The surface was rugged, with jagged cliffs and expansive, desolate deserts. But hidden within the planet's rough landscape, far beneath the surface, was a secret base, one of the few safe havens for those who had escaped the Zoraxian oppression. This was where Lyra had told Jack they would find the resistance. As the shuttle landed in a secluded valley, the shuttle's engines powered down. Jack and Lyra exchanged a look of silent determination before disembarking. The harsh winds whipped against their faces as they made their way toward a concealed entrance in the rock face. Inside, they were greeted by a group of rugged individuals, their faces a mix of hope and weariness. Jack noticed that many of them were from species that had been subjugated by the Zoraxians for years. People whose homes had been razed, whose families had been taken or killed. These were the survivors, the fighters. One of the resistance leaders, a stocky alien with 4 arms and a deep, gravelly voice, approached Jack. "Lyra said you were the one," he said, his eyes scanning Jack with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "You're the human who survived the Zoraxian weapons." Jack met his gaze with unwavering resolve. I'm the one who's going to help you fight back." The leader nodded slowly, his expression shifting from suspicion to cautious optimism. "Then it's time to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." In the days that followed, Jack and Lyra helped organize the scattered rebel factions. They moved quickly, sharing the story of Jack's survival and immunity. Slowly, others began to join their cause. Individuals who had long felt powerless, but now saw an opportunity to fight. Rumors began to spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity had found a way to resist the Zoraxians, and as more and more people heard the tale of the immortal human, the tide began to turn. The rebels grew bolder, emboldened by the idea that they, too, could stand up to the Zoraxian Empire. But the Zoraxians were not idle. The Galactic Council was already moving to crush the rebellion before it could grow too powerful. They sent their most elite soldiers to track down Jack, to erase the hope that was spreading throughout the galaxy. But every time they came close, the rebellion slipped further into the shadows, growing stronger with each passing day. As Jack looked out across the gathering rebel forces, a feeling of determination filled him. The rebellion was only just beginning, and they were about to show the galaxy what humanity could do when they fought for their freedom. For the first time, Jack felt that the impossible might actually be within their reach. The ultimate battle. The rebel forces had grown in number and strength since Jack's arrival. What had started as a small cell of resistance fighters on a forgotten planet was now a fully fledged alliance of species, united under one cause: to overthrow the Zoraxian Empire. Hope had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and the Zoraxians could feel the shift in power. They had underestimated humanity, and now the rebellion was gathering its forces for a final strike. Jack stood at the head of a makeshift command center, a large map of the galaxy projected before him. The Zoraxian Empire had been shaken, but their forces were still vast, their technology advanced. Jack knew that their next move had to be bold, swift, and precise. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The Council was already aware of the growing rebellion and had dispatched their most powerful warships to crush the resistance once and for all. "We have one chance," Jack said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of responsibility. "We can't wait for the Zoraxians to come to us. We have to take the fight to them. We strike at their heart." Lyra stood beside him, her eyes narrowed in concentration as she scanned the data. "The Zoraxian capital is heavily fortified, but it's also their weakest point. If we can disable their fleet's main command center, we'll cripple their entire war machine." Jack turned to the rebel leaders, who were gathered around the table. Among them were beings of every shape, size, and color, some with tentacles, others with wings, and still others with scales or armored exteriors. But they all shared one thing in common: a burning desire for freedom from Zoraxian oppression. "We've all suffered under the Zoraxian boot," said a tall, spindly alien with deep green skin. "But now we have a chance to fight back, to show them that we're not their slaves." Another leader, a short, stocky being covered in silver fur, growled in agreement. "We've lost too much already. This is our chance to take back what's ours." The group turned to Jack, awaiting his decision. He stood tall, his mind focused on the task ahead. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about ending the Zoraxian stranglehold on the galaxy once and for all. "We'll need to coordinate our fleets and launch a simultaneous assault on Zoraxian strongholds," Jack said. "We'll take down their communication arrays, their supply lines, and hit their fleet command center. We disrupt their control, and the Empire will collapse." The rebel leaders nodded in agreement, their faces hardening with resolve. It was a risky plan. If the Zoraxians saw them coming, they would be obliterated before they could strike. But if they succeeded, it could change everything. The day of the attack arrived, and the vast rebel fleet assembled in orbit above a distant, desolate moon. Jack stood on the bridge of one of the lead ships, Lyra at his side, watching the hundreds of ships preparing for the assault. Rebel forces from all corners of the galaxy had joined their cause. There were ships of every shape and size, patched together from different civilizations, each one a testament to the unity of species that had once been divided by fear and oppression. Jack took a deep breath, his hand tightening around the console in front of him. This was it. There was no turning back now. Rebel forces, prepare for battle. Jack's voice echoed through the comms. Remember, this is more than a fight for survival. This is a fight for freedom. For our future. We will not let the Zoraxians destroy us any longer. We take the fight to them. We take our galaxy back. The response came in unison, the voice of countless species shouting across the stars. For freedom. The battle began. Rebel ships flew in tight formations, weaving through the darkness of space, engaging Zoraxian warships that had been stationed to protect the capital. The space around them erupted in explosions as laser fire and plasma blasts lit up the black void. The rebel fleet was outnumbered and outgunned, but they fought with a fury fueled by desperation and hope. Jack's ship led the charge, flying directly toward the Zoraxian command center. The ship's hull rattled as enemy fire struck, but it held strong. The crew worked tirelessly, evading enemy fire and pushing forward toward the heart of the Zoraxian fleet. We're almost there, Lyra said, her voice calm but urgent as she navigated the ship through the chaos. The command center is just ahead. We need to disable their defenses before they can retaliate. Jack nodded. Do it. Now. Lyra activated the ship's weapon systems, launching a series of EMP blasts toward the Zoraxian command center. The energy pulses struck the center of their fleet, sending shockwaves of disruption through the Zoraxian communication systems. For a brief moment, the Zoraxians lost control, their ships faltering as their coordination fell apart. It was their chance. The rebel ships pushed forward, engaging the now disorganized Zoraxian fleet. Jack's ship, guided by Lyra's quick thinking, broke through the Zoraxian defenses and flew directly toward the command center's core. The core was a massive, heavily guarded station, a floating fortress in the heart of the Zoraxian Empire. As the rebel ships made their final push, Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was the moment that would decide the fate of the galaxy. If they failed, it would be the end of all hope. But if they succeeded, the Zoraxians would be crippled. The rebellion would have a chance to win. They were in the final stretch. Suddenly, the Zoraxians launched a counterattack, their flagship unleashing a devastating energy wave aimed directly at Jack's ship. The blast shook the entire vessel, sending shockwaves through the hull. We're hit, one of the crew members shouted. Lyra's hands moved faster than ever as she worked to stabilize the ship's systems. I can keep us together, but we need to take down their flagship's shields, or we won't make it. Jack didn't hesitate. We'll take them down together. All ships, focus fire on the Zoraxian flagship. The rebel fleet responded in unison, focusing their fire on the Zoraxian flagship. The Zoraxian ship, already weakened from the earlier EMP blasts, began to falter under the relentless barrage. Explosions ripped through its hull, and its energy shields began to crack under the pressure. With one final push, the flagship's shields collapsed, and the rebel fleet launched a full salvo of energy blasts that tore through the heart of the Zoraxian vessel. The flagship exploded in a brilliant flash of light, sending shockwaves through the surrounding space. Direct hit. One of the crew members cheered. The flagship is down. But the battle was far from over. The Zoraxian forces had been dealt a severe blow, but the Council's remaining fleets would fight to the death. Jack's ship took heavy damage, but the crew pressed on, knowing that the final victory was within their reach. As the Zoraxian Empire crumbled around them, Jack felt the weight of the moment lift. The galaxy had changed forever. The rebellion had triumphed. And humanity had led the charge. Back on the battlefield, the final Zoraxian forces were in retreat, and the rebel fleet was victorious. The destruction of the Zoraxian flagship was a symbolic moment, one that would be remembered for generations to come. The Galactic Council's power had been shattered, their empire on the brink of collapse. Jack stood on the bridge of his ship, looking out at the debris of the battle. The galaxy was finally free. But as the stars stretched before him, he knew this was only the beginning. The war was over, but the future had just begun. The galaxy was theirs, a new dawn. The battle had been won, but the work was far from over. Jack stood on the bridge of his ship, the stars stretching out before him in endless space. The remnants of the Zoraxian fleet floated in the distance, their once imposing warships now nothing more than fragments of debris, scattered across the void. The rebel forces had succeeded in their most daring strike, and the Zoraxian Empire, once a relentless force of domination and control, was now crumbling. The sense of victory hung heavy in the air, but so did the weight of the responsibility that now rested on Jack's shoulders. The war was over, but the future was uncertain. What came next for the galaxy? How would they rebuild after years of oppression, suffering, and destruction? Is it over? Lyra's voice broke through Jack's thoughts as she stepped up beside him. Her silvery hair fluttered in the artificial gravity, and her eyes, usually full of intensity and fire, now seemed to hold a quiet sadness. Jack glanced at her, his expression softening. The war is over. The Zoraxians are finished, but now we have to rebuild. We have to make sure the galaxy doesn't fall into chaos. Lyra nodded slowly, understanding the weight of his words. The Empire fell, but their influence is still felt in every corner of the galaxy. Some worlds still fear the Zoraxians, and many will need time to trust again. The rebellion isn't just about fighting the Zoraxians anymore. It's about ensuring that no one ever has to live under their boot again. Jack's mind raced with the possibilities. They had won the battle, but now the galaxy was theirs to shape. The Resistance had shown the galaxy that it was possible to defy the Zoraxians, to stand up to tyranny. But there were still countless species, countless worlds, that needed healing. There were wounds to mend, alliances to form, and peace to forge. This wasn't just about victory. It was about creating something better. A communicator beeped, interrupting their thoughts. It was a message from the leaders of the rebellion, calling for a summit to discuss the future of the galaxy. Jack took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when the true challenge would begin. No longer would he be just the survivor, the human who had endured the Zoraxian weapons. He was now a leader, one of the many who would help shape the future of a galaxy once ruled by fear. The summit was held on a neutral planet, a world untouched by the scars of war. It was a place of peace, a place where delegates from countless species gathered to discuss the future of the galaxy. Jack stood at the head of the table, surrounded by leaders from all corners of the universe. Rebel commanders, alien diplomats, and former enemies, now united in a common cause. Lyra stood beside him, her presence a quiet strength. Jack could feel the weight of their gazes on him. He had become a symbol of hope, not just for humanity, but for all species that had been oppressed by the Zoraxians. His survival had ignited the spark of resistance, but now he had to prove that humanity could lead in peace, not just in war. "We've won," Jack began, his voice steady but filled with the gravity of the moment. "The Zoraxians are no longer a threat. But we all know that defeating an empire is only the first step. The real work begins now." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of the leaders, some hopeful, some skeptical, but all united in purpose. The galaxy is a fractured place. We've been divided for too long, whether by species, by planets, by our fears. But now we have a choice. We can either continue the way we have always been, always fighting, always in conflict, or we can build something new, something better. The room was silent, and Jack could see the weight of his words sinking in. They weren't just discussing the end of a war, they were discussing the future of everything. The future of the galaxy, of the species that had been enslaved, and of the new alliances that would shape the coming era. "We must rebuild together," Jack continued, his voice gaining strength. "It won't be easy. There are wounds that need to heal, and trust that must be earned. But we have a chance now, a chance to forge a galaxy where every species, every world, has the freedom to choose its own path. A galaxy where no one will ever be ruled by fear again. One by one, the delegates began to speak, sharing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future. Jack listened intently, hearing not just words but the collective vision of a galaxy that was no longer bound by the chains of an oppressive empire. This was the beginning of something new, a galaxy united by the will to live freely. Weeks passed, and the summit turned into action. Delegations were formed, treaties were signed, and the first steps toward unity were taken. Jack, with Lyra by his side, traveled from one planet to another, meeting with leaders, helping to mediate peace, and ensuring that the rebellion's victory would not be squandered. The galaxy began to heal. The once dominant Zoraxian fleets were dismantled, their remaining forces disbanded or absorbed into new coalitions. Former enemies became allies, and new bonds were formed between species that had once been locked in conflict. It was a long, difficult process, but it was progress. One day, as Jack and Lyra stood on the observation deck of the newly established Galactic Council headquarters, Jack gazed out at the stars, the vast expanse of space stretching out before him. It was a peaceful sight, a hopeful sight. The galaxy was no longer at war. The dark days of oppression had passed, and now it was up to the galaxy's inhabitants to determine their future. "We did it," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with quiet satisfaction. Jack turned to her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "No, we did it." He knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be obstacles. But now, the galaxy had the chance to rebuild. And this time, they would do it together. The galaxy was no longer the domain of the Zoraxians. It belonged to everyone. It belonged to the brave rebels who had fought for freedom. It belonged to the countless species who had united to take back their futures. And perhaps most importantly, it belonged to humanity, the species that had proved, beyond all doubt, that resilience and unity could overcome even the greatest of empires. As Jack looked out at the stars, he knew that humanity's place in the galaxy was secure. But more than that, he knew that they had made the galaxy a place where hope could grow, where freedom could flourish, and where every species had the chance to rise above their past and embrace a brighter future. The new dawn had arrived.